Stephanie, we will let you go ahead and begin.
Well, thank you so much for that introduction, Martha. I'm putting into the chat a link to the presentation so that you can follow along. You can just copy and paste it into your browser. A lot of what I'll be showing you tonight will be sort of a live demo in situ, if you will, but this will give you a good resource to follow back up with. And I'm always available for questions. You know, if you have something that ruminates with you after we speak tonight, I'm more than happy to answer that question at another time. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay. All right. So today we're going to take a look at Elevate, and we're going to explore a lot of different avenues. And then another, I think, really important element of what we're going to talk about with respect to Cambridge Elevate is what to do if you have Elevate, but your students do not. So how can you leverage the same technology in your classroom when you don't have subscriptions or seat licenses for each of your students? So, Martha gave you my quick bio. There's my email address. You can follow me on Twitter, and NACCP now has a Twitter account as well, so you can follow them. We just launched it this month, so we don't have a whole lot of followers yet, but we'll get there, don't worry. If you're on the presentation, you can also click this training link or the picture of the training, which will take you directly to the website that has training information for other opportunities that NACCP offers. It also will direct you to that same site has a list of recordings of previous webinars and other previous workshops so that you can refer back to it at any point in the future. So without further ado, let's talk a little bit about Elevate. On a couple of these slides too, well, most of them, I think, I know in the Facebook group, at least, if you are familiar with that form of social media, there have been some questions about how to reach people in charge of websites or Elevate subscriptions. And obviously there is the customer service email address that you probably know and you may or may not have already tried to contact. But I just wanted to offer up two other contacts at Cambridge. Their names are here, Zinta and Samantha, and they can both help you out if you are not getting a timely response from customer service, or if you are interested in purchasing a subscription of Elevate for your district. Samantha is the person who can help to arrange that for you, or if you just wanted Elevate for your own professional self. So if you've never been to it, you can go to elevate.cambridge.org, which is where we will start. And I'm going to share with you this slide first before I get into my Elevate account, because I want to be able to just sort of prepare you for seeing the difference, if you will. Elevate is kind of like Janus. He's got two faces, and so does Elevate. There are two different types of subscriptions you can and perhaps should get for Elevate. One of them is a teacher subscription. The other one is a student subscription. And the student subscription that you can get is exactly what your students would have access to. There is no way that your students themselves will have access to a teacher edition though. So just keep that in mind. And you can get a variety of different resources on each site. So for example, on the teacher side of Elevate, there are translations to the stories in the text, save for Unit 4. They're still working on drafting the translations for those texts. And we're close to being able to launch them, but the UK Cambridge Classics Project is doing other projects right now, so that's not really the focus of their time at this moment. So we will get them there. But for units 1 through 3, there are translations of all the stories. There are answer keys to exercises. There are answer keys to worksheets that they have, as well as answer keys to all of the practicing the language activities that are in your textbook. And then there are publisher-based assessments for each stage. There is a unique story for each stage that has been created as a stage test or a unit test for that particular stage. It does feature, as I said, a brand new story that has the same vocabulary and the same characters. In a lot of cases, the story that's in the stage test helps to serve as a bridge between the stage that you are ending and the stage that you would be about to begin. Or, in certain cases, it serves as a coda for the stage that you just finished. For example, at the end of Unit 2, stage 20, Barbalus, who is a character and a benefactor for Quintus, Barbalus dies. And there are a lot of suspicious events that happen around his death with respect to an astrologer. So the stage test for Elevate has is a story that does not exist in the textbook, but it's a story about how the astrologer eventually gets punished by Isis and he himself falls to his death. And then with that stage translation or stage story, there are reading comprehension questions and test questions. Everything is all laid out for you. Even the scoring mechanism is there. So it's really super easy to use and to, adapt for use in your classroom as well. As I said, there are also worksheets. The worksheets comprise story-based activities, culture-based activities, grammar-based activities, and activities that blend all three of those things together. And then, of course, the teacher's side of Elevate contains the gold, which is the teacher's guide. The teacher's guide has so much plentiful information about each stage, about each unit, and it's really a phenomenal resource to have. The student side features the online textbook so that students can always access the text, especially, in the last 2 years when remote education has become a thing and students are not always bringing textbooks back and forth between school and home, or they're home for longer periods of time. Having the online textbook in, carbon copy, the same colors of the activities, etc., is a really useful tool. There's something called Explore the Story for each of the stories that's in each stage. We'll talk more about that in a moment. There's a vocab tester in for each stage as well. There are grammar and culture activities that require students sorting information and being able to differentiate between different concepts. And then there's a whole host of links to informational sites about the culture that each of the stage presents. So the student Elevate account is a really, really bountiful resource. And of course, I understand that not every district has the finances or the arrangement or whatever to be able to afford each student their own Elevate site or Elevate access, I should say. If nothing else, I would hope that perhaps after we meet tonight that you might be able to take advantage of getting yourself an Elevate teacher and an Elevate student account. That way you can at least leverage the same activities, even if not every student will be doing it on their own device, you'll still be able to do it in class. So let's go to Elevate and we'll see what this looks like. So when you create your username and password, they're actually very strict about passwords. They really want to make sure that you have very safe passwords. So they want to make sure there's like a set combination of like letters and numbers and figures and stuff like that. So I don't even know what mine is anymore. It's that complicated. So as I said, when you get into Elevate, you are faced with two different types of Elevate subscriptions. On the left, it's my teacher resources, and on the right, it's the student resources. One of the most dynamic things about using Elevate is that having one license or a 1-year license, it gives you access to all 4 units. Unit 1, 2, 3, and 4. And the same goes for a student subscription. Someone had just been asking on the Facebook group a few weeks ago about students who didn't finish Unit 1. And so this particular teacher wanted to make sure that they could continue into Unit 2, but they didn't have additional money for additional seat licenses. And a lot of people chimed in and said, well, actually, as long as your student has an unexpired Elevate account, they can access anything. And that's beautiful, especially because our discipline is a cumulative type of discipline. And so the grammatical activities, the vocab, the stories, the characters, they're all building upon each other. And sometimes if students have a weaker foundation, or if their foundation was a couple of years ago, maybe they took a gap in their schooling and now they're back in your classroom, you can offer them the ability to go into Elevate and review everything from the beginning and just, get that text out, start at Unit 1, Stage 1, read about Caeculace's family. There are also a lot of really great opportunities too, and we were presenting a little bit about this at the 2021 summer workshops. There are a lot of Easter eggs of character development and plot development that happen in the later stages. I say later stages like Unit 2, 3, and 4. There are a lot of references to things that have happened earlier. So it would be really fun to kind of go back to an old story and really point it out to the kids, like this is what happened earlier. So there are a lot of good uses for having all 4 units at both your disposal as well as at the student's disposal. Let's take a look first at the teacher resources page. When I access teacher resources, for the most part, Elevate navigation is the same, whether you're in teacher resources or student resources. Insofar as on the left-hand side, that's where most of your navigation mechanisms are resting. So home takes you to that home page that we were just on with the teachers and the student resources next to each other. Contents takes you to a table of contents for each of the stages and each of the units. Bookmarks help you to keep track of important activities that you might want to go back to. Perhaps you're, doing some lesson planning for, the next unit, the next week, whatever. You can bookmark an activity and come back to it. So as far as accessing various stages and whatnot, here we are in Unit 1. I just happened to be in stage 12. I was looking for something else. But, again, this was such a great resource. I was working with another teacher in my district who is in stage 12 right now with her students. And so I was in a tech development session, and I just happened to say, oh, wait a second, I think that there's something that might be available within that stage. And so I was able to just go back and access that to, have a common ground for that conversation. So it is a really good tool for articulation too. I know not all of us have the luxury of having another Latin teacher in our school or in our district, but for doing cross grade and cross level articulation, it's a really powerful tool for that as well. So if you were to start right here at Unit 1, before you even get to the stages, this is where the teacher's manual is. And then you can get all the translations and all the answers to Unit 1 all at the same time. Or you can go about it in a stage-by-stage way. So there are a couple different ways to go about it, depending on what type of information access you would need. Let's see here. Have you entered the teacher book code to add it? Yes, I had to add a teacher code and a student code to get both of them. So Terry says your doesn't contain the window for the teacher, but you have a teacher subscription. If you have a teacher subscription, it should be popping up as such. The characters, the codes are the same type of codes. So if you've copied and pasted a code in that was given to you, that's what you're given access to. So if you don't have it right now, I might seek out either customer service to make sure that you've gotten what you paid for. Oh, it's okay. Don't worry about it. Okay, so right at the beginning of each of the units, you have the teacher's manual and translation, and then stage 1, here we go. We have everything just laid out for you. It always starts with, I shouldn't say always, I guess it does usually always start out with the assessment for the stage. QP is the cute little British English little phrase of question paper, which is what they call the test itself. And then the mark scheme is another cute little British expression for the answer key. And then you can scroll down, you can get translations and answers. Now, stage one, as we all know, because we've all taught stage one innumerable times already, there's no real like grammar, or there's only the one story, it really focuses on a lot of the model sentences and doesn't have sort of what the typical stage has. However, there are still language worksheets that are available to you here. How is Latin pronounced? There's a worksheet and then an answer key. If you can see my screen, there is a very tiny, subtle difference in the naming of the document itself versus the answer key. The answer key has the letter A at the end of it. But you can go in, you can preview it before you even download it. And you can just see, okay, well, this is what this looks like. And then if perhaps you're not really sure what they're getting at with a particular activity, you can get the answer key there. Sometimes it might be helpful to have an answer key and be able to, show it on the projector or something so that the students can check their work, or, give it to a student who is working remotely, just to send that along and say, hey, we did this activity in class and you can check your answers or something like that. So at the end of the language worksheets, then we get to civilization worksheets. There's always several for each stage. One of the best things about the Cambridge Latin course is the number of ancillary resources that it offers every teacher who uses it. And look, there's like the Caecilius diploma, there's a worksheet about houses in Pompeii, in Willa 1 and 2 worksheet answers, Metella, there's something about the Lares. I mean, really, could just spend a day just doing like, worksheet type stuff for your students, and really have a very thorough approach. So navigating through, I could go to stage 14 and you're going to see almost the exact same setup, right? So here's stage 14, you can story assessments, translation answers, language worksheets, keep scrolling, story-based worksheets, and then civilization worksheets. So that's probably the biggest development between stages 1 and 14, is that there are story worksheets and language or grammar based worksheets, but they all still have these civilization worksheets at the end of each of the stages. So, sorry, it's my elevator. I'm not sure if everybody else's is, but it's a little slow on the old scrolling. When you're in your teacher navigate, okay, yeah, the teacher side is really beautiful. When you're in the teacher website or the student website for that matter, you'll see on the right and left of the table of contents that's here, there are these little arrows. These arrows will parachute you to the next stage so that you can quickly access the various stages, and you can kind of go back and forth so that as you're planning one stage and you're done, you can move on and just, go right away. So the teacher side is sort of like having, a giant teacher's manual with a bunch of worksheets and a bunch of answers and, tests and stuff like that. So, a pretty, I think, traditional resource for teachers. But I say traditional, but I don't mean that in any sort of disparaging way, because as you saw, there's a ton of content that they offer teachers. But let's go to the student side, because if you thought there were a lot of resources on the teacher side, you ain't seen nothing yet. So here is the student resource page. I happen to be in stage 22 right now. They do this lovely thing for the students that each of the stages is also color coded by the unit, so that the students know I use a green book for Latin right now, and so I have a green heading. I actually, well, because I'm in stage 22, I only recently switched from the blue book to the green book. And it was funny watching all the kids, they'd go into Access Elevate and they'd look for something and be like, oh, wait, I'm in the wrong stage, because it was blue and not green, but you could see them kind of like click with it. At the beginning of each stage, it actually takes you immediately to the CSCP website that gives cultural background links and further information about the culture that each of the stages addresses. So you can click on Roman curses and it's a drop down. So look, I mean, 4 or 5 links popped up here. It's really, really incredible to see how much content they have and how much they have to supplement your average classroom experience, and how much they have to really augment the students' awareness for what's being addressed in each of the chapters. So whatchamacallit. So here's the web book, the Stage 22 web book. Now you're going to notice there's a web book here and there's a web book here. There are 2 different versions. This is a web book that's an online web book, which basically means it will stay up as a website for a certain period of time. I'm not quite sure what that certain period of time is. I have used it, like kept it open in a tab, closed the regular Elevate tab, and operated with this for at least a few hours or so before it like eventually kind of kicks you out and says, your access has expired. On the other hand, the offline web book is meant to be used in an offline capacity. So it's meant to not require like constant internet access, if you will. It looks exactly the same though. So there's no difference in the content of the book itself. I'm going to go ahead and close out of this. And I want to show you as well that within each of the web books things, so, the students can navigate between, next page, previous page, etc. Up here, this little icon here is for navigation, and you can scroll or toggle between different stages, but language information is also here. And so, students, when they have the physical textbook, they're always looking at like charts in the back of the book and the dictionary, et cetera, et cetera. So language information takes care of all that. It does do it by page, but most of the time kids will just start at 259 and, just kind of work their way to whatever set of, adjectives or noun endings or something that they need to refer to. So that is always available for them. It's a little bit more hidden. You kind of have to know how to get into it, but it's definitely still there. Interestingly, the web book version for students and for you too, you can't copy and paste the content from here into a document or anything. We understand why, because obviously there is copyright. But I just want you to be aware that if you wanted to use something in a verbatim sense, you can't just lift it out of the text. You will have to do a little bit of, heavy work in terms of, adapting it into a doc. So there is the web book, and then I'm going to scroll down and we're going to get to the stories. So in each of the stages, it takes the stories one by one and offers students a variety of different activities to do within the story. So here is explore the story for Vilbia. Every story that's in CLC has an explore the story platform. There are some features to explore the story that if you talk to certain people, they really despise explore the story. So I just want to caution you. Explore the story has an extraordinary gift that a lot of people do not like. And that is that when students click on a word, it gives them the definition as well as the form right off the bat. Garriebant, it tells them it's a verb, third person plural, imperfect, it means to chatter. I can understand the concern behind why this might not be an attractive option, because students really do get accustomed to kind of clicking around before they get to the correct answer rather than doing a little bit more, work to get to the answer. However, I want to show you the other side of the coin in that there are a number of students who really do struggle with trying to make meaning of a certain passage. And if it means that they click on a word, I mean, to be honest, as they're looking at a sentence to translate it or make sense of what's happening, if they're stumbling on a word, they're a lot less likely to go research it in a dictionary than they are to just click on it and figure out what the definition is. And having them have enough sense of the sentence just from looking up puellae, that's okay for me. depending on the circumstance, right? There are sometimes, like if I do a close translation, one of those open-ended where they're filling in words within the sentence. If they do that, I don't allow them to use explore the story because I feel like I'm giving you 90% of the story on paper. I'd like for you to be able to put together the other 10%, right? That's the whole task. And otherwise it's just kind of looking up the word. So you can take that with a grain of salt. It does have this wonderful feature to explore the story under read. Okay. If you don't do read, you can do listen and you can have the story read to you. So when you click listen, nothing happens immediately. All you have to do is click the beginning and the story starts going.
Wilbia. Wilbia et rubria, vocula sordida lavantes, inculina taberna.
Okay, I don't know if you guys could hear that. I'm not sure if I have my share settings on the right way, but somebody's reading that story out loud, which is lovely. If I went back to read, I want to show you something that I didn't show you originally, but when you're in the read portion, you have the whole story here. It's all formatted with the line numbers and macrons the same way you'd love it to be. One thing that remains hidden that I love using in class, and I also love showing it to people because not a lot of people know that it exists. In the lower left-hand corner is this button that says word check. If you click it, oh, well, hold on. I have to reload the story. It's because I clicked on only a handful of letters. All right, if I click on word check, I get a list of every single vocabulary word that was used in the entire story. What just happened earlier was that because we had only read the first sentence in half or something like that, those were the words that it thought they should, organize in a big list rather than the words of the whole story. So here's a whole vocab list from the story, and it can be helpful to have students warm up for a story-based experience in your class by having them warm up with some vocab. And to that end, after you click word check, you can click here where it says start test. And then the students have a test that's in front of them. And then they have to fill out they have to, create the definition of each word, etc. One of the things that I love about using for this particular activity, when I do this as an activity for my students, I give them a set number of words and I say, okay, you need to define 100 words. You need to get, at least 50% of them correct. So they're looking for a score of at least 50 out of 100. And as they're, defining that 100 words, they can kind of like, okay, well, I have a little bit of a bank, right? Like I have 37 out of 100, right? So, or 37 out of 50, right? Like I can get a few more wrong, or I have to get more right in the second half, or whatever the case is. I've also done it a different way, to just ask students to do this word check and just have them define words just continuously. Just define as many words as you can in 5 minutes. And then I will take a look at their screens. I'll do it either through our software that monitors the students' Chromebook usage, or I'll just go around the room and I'll just say, okay, well, whoever defined the most words, I usually don't care about correctness. Whoever defined the most words, in that 5-minute period of time, you get extra participation points for the day. And that kind of gives the kids incentive to really push through and keep going. One thing to be aware of if you're going to use word check in your classroom, and this is the same case in Vocab Tester, which I'll show you in a moment. But some of the definitions are a little specific. It is a software, it is driven by a very specific algorithm, but there are some British spellings of words that students might not be hip to the idea of right away, like honor, O-U-R, things like that. So if they don't spell it correctly, then they get dinged and it looks like a wrong answer. And I have so many students who are like, no, I was correct. How did you not, but that's one of the reasons that I give such leeway to say, just define 100 words. Try to get 50 right, because I know that within the 50 that they get wrong, they're going to have a lot of algorithm based errors. Like for this one, if I just wrote great, well, I mean, I know that it should be the superlative degree, but I'm showing you that if you put in an incorrect answer, it does tell you what the acceptable answers would have been to kind of give kids the goal of like, this is what you should shoot for moving forward. I'm also a really big fan of this type of vocabulary review. I know a lot of kids and teachers, we use a lot of Quizlet or, GimKit, BlueKit, I use them very frequently too. But a lot of those are multiple choice based. And I try to tell the students that although multiple choice review of vocab is very important, I do feel like the instances where you can ask the students to create the definition by typing it in, I think that that fosters a certain and a different and a necessary skill for them that a multiple choice format doesn't offer to them. Because when they're reading a story, first time, second time, third time, they have to be able to look at a word like fabula and their mind has to be able to develop the definition, because the definition for fabula is not just somewhere else on the page and they have to match it. They have to know what that definition is. So anyway, so I like word check for that particular purpose. I'm going to go back up here to my options. Think. Oh my God, think is sent from Minerva herself. I love think questions. And I think that think questions are fantastic learning tools, teaching tools, assessment tools, everything tools. And there's a hidden benefit that the think questions are all worded in the exact same format that all the stage tests are that CLC, the textbook series has created. So when I went to think, you probably were like, okay, well, nothing changed on the screen. I know, but there are a bunch of footnotes here, and the footnotes point you in the direction of the questions. So I'm going to click on footnote number 1. Click the 3-word phrase which shows where this story takes place. Okay, so I'm a student and I'm going to say in and I'm going to say Kulina, but I'm not sure about what the other word might be. So I'm going to go ahead and just click the wrong word so I can show you. It tells me I'm wrong. And I can keep clicking around. And after a certain time, it tells me, no, the third correct answer should have been Tabernae. And then it clarifies for me, the story is set in the kitchen of an inn. And then it gives me some context. The inn is in the town of Aquae At the bottom, if you see, I mean, this footnote said 1 of 2. At the bottom, I click here to do next part. And then there's an open-ended question. What were the two girls doing as they chattered? They were washing cups. And then, of course, it gives you the answer right there. So I use think questions all the time in a lot of different formats, but I also try to tell the students if they're studying for a stage test that they should do as many think questions that they can get their hands on, because the format of these is almost identical to the format of questions of reading comprehension, translation, find the word that says, when they did something. All of those questions that are on the test are replicated in think. So it's a good way to review a story. It's a good way to kind of breeze through a story if you don't have a lot of time to do one particular story in class. It's a great way to build reading comprehension skills. And I like the fact that, even in that open-ended, it doesn't correct me, but I'm okay with that because I can see that this is my answer and that this is the correct answer. And I can kind of leverage to see how well did I do? And there are, in this particular story, there are 27 footnotes, and each footnote may have 1, 2, or even 3 different parts to it. So there's a lot of different possibilities. Some of the questions that they give for think questions, let's see, Vilbia says Modestus is different. Click the 2 words that show the difference in their characters. So, that's making a really great character evaluation, which is something that, we do as a class activity, but this is helpful for the students to start doing independently. There are also multiple choice questions too. Click the correct translation of something. No, there is no way to see a report of which students which stories students have read with think questions. That has long been a conversation that we've been having with Cambridge University Press, because I also would like the ability to have software that sort of tracks student activity. They're working with a software model, which is brilliant because it understands Latin, but it's not formatted in the right way to be able to do that type of tracking. So eventually, I mean, I've raised this to Caroline Bristow like probably 25 times. She's probably sick of me hearing something or me saying something about this all the time. So they know that it's a concern. They know that it's something that US customers at least really want in our software. And they know that that's a feature that other software programs in other languages, et cetera, they know that that is happening elsewhere. So they know that there's a bit of an impetus to try to make it happen in our discipline. So no for right now, but hopefully that'll change at some point. The interim solution that I tend to use with my students is that I have them film a screencast of themselves answering the think questions. And I can watch those screencasts in, double, triple, quadruple time. And I tell my students this too, I don't need them to answer every think question correctly. And even when we didn't have the paid version of Screencastify Mid-District and we just had like the 5-minute version, I would just say, okay, take 5 minutes, see how many think questions you can answer in that 5 minutes. Because I really just want to see them see evidence of them trying. I also take a screencast because I kind of want to see, if a student is submitting a screencast that's, 25 minutes and they didn't finish all the questions, that is, as important a piece of evidence about the student's learning pattern as whether or not they get the answer correct or not. Because I think that that's an informative view on the student's assessment pace, their learning pace, and depending on how much time we're actually talking about, it might be cause to bring it up to their guidance counselor or something like that for testing. So you could have them do it as like a screencast to submit that. Other than that, it's sort of a trust system then that they've answered it. You could, if you really wanted to, you could, if you ask them to do this for an assignment, you could check to see if they had done it by making like an extra credit question on the test from one of the think questions or something like that. So if they had done it, you would know it because of that. Okay, and then finally, derive. Derive has all sorts of derivatives that are given to the students. So we have et. It gives English, French, and Spanish derivatives, which is fantastic, especially if you have a multilingual program in your school, so that you can have students kind of, compare apples to oranges, etc. Oh, you're welcome. Even like pulcra, it gives English and Spanish derivatives. Pottery obviously has a ton of different derivatives. And that, my friends, that is just clicking explore the story. There's so much more in Student Elevate. As I said, there are explore the stories for every story. I will say there are not think questions for every story, which I can understand because I can imagine they probably take a long time to create stuff like that. So for example, Amor Omnia Vincit is a 3-part story. It's 3 stories that really essentially are 3 chapters of one story. None of them have think questions, but you could also challenge your own students to write their think questions or something like that. You've done think questions for the first 2 stories in the stage. Now it's your chance to show me the other, what you think of think skills. Sorry, I forgot my computer was not plugged in.
They did 2 stories per stage with think questions.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I didn't realize that there was a chemistry to it. So that makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, 2 per stage.
Okay. Yeah. And as I said, it's an enormous amount of work, so I can't expect more. All right. So moving below the stories themselves. So this is the vocab tester assignment that I had alluded to earlier. The vocab tester is really lovely. It's so useful to have this present for all the students. There are a lot of different parameters that you can help the students set up based on their evident needs. You can have them just do 10 words at a time, or 40 words at a time, etc. I always encourage them to click this and play around with some of the variables here. I don't usually limit the minutes for a test because I don't want them to think that there's a pressure to answer them quickly, but that, there's a time and a place for everything, I suppose. Latin to English is what I do most of the time, but you could also do English to Latin. And then here's like one of the most amazing developments. You could either do checklist words in a stage, or you can do all the new words, which is all the words that are glossed next to all of the stories. So all the words that are in bold for a particular stage. And then here's another really fantastic bonus. And this is the little word in. If you click in, you can change it from in to up to. So you can say all the checklist words from stage 1 all the way through stage 22. It's dynamite how much stuff they can pull together here for a vocab test. And then finally, so I'm in the Unit 3 vocab tester, but here's stage 22, but these are all the stages that Unit 3 has to offer. If I were to do a vocab tester in Unit 2, number one, it'll be blue across the top and on the bottom to help me remember that I'm in Unit 2. But if I'm in Unit 2, I can go up to only stage 20. Okay, so you kind of plays around with the stages that are germane to the textbook itself. So I can do all the checklist words up to stage 22. And then type of test, you can either do multiple choice or you can do type in. And this, again, is such an essential a component to being able to test students' vocabulary. There is absolutely a place for multiple choice testing or quizzing or reviewing of vocabulary. But I think that there's a stronger link for students with type in vocabulary options that, again, forces their brain to sort of develop the definition on paper versus just sort of recognizing what the definition is. And if you have a really weak student, it would be fine to set them up with a multiple choice test, 100 words multiple choice, but then maybe your high flyers 100 words type in. And you can kind of vary it based on the student. You can differentiate as much as you want. Maybe you're really super high flyers that are, ready for AP and Latin 1. Maybe you do time them with their vocab, and maybe you do try to get them to think even more quickly than they usually do. So as far as vocab tester, once they start, then it just, it gives words. So sometimes I'll do this as like a homework activity. And for homework, I have them screenshot the beginning where they're setting it up, so I know that they've set it up the right way. And then I'll have them screenshot the end. And I tell them that their goal is a certain score. So their goal is, over an 80% or, over a 50%, depending on how many words I'm asking them to do. So that would be an idea for using Vocab Tester. Now, there's a whole category of sorting words. I'm not going to go through every one of them because they all kind of have the same element. They're all drag and drop activities. Which gender? So the students then have to look at, each of the nouns and then sort them by their respective gender. And I'm going to do a quick sort so I can show you what happens. Whoops. After a student does it. And if you see on the very top, well, this one happens to say question 1 of 1. But a lot of these actually have multiple questions, but it does show you all the answers. In participles, for example, it actually says here, question 1 of 5. So you get this sort. Once you're done with this sort, you move on to a different screen. And sometimes it goes, present, perfect, active, present, perfect, passive, perfect, active, perfect, passive. So it kind of builds on the student's ability to differentiate between different words. Those sorting activities are great for grammar, but they also have them for character recognition, adjectives and adverbs, which was a new concept that was introduced in stage 21 in terms of developing adverbs from adjectives. Declension, so there's a lot of review that's embedded. It's not just the new grammatical concepts. And then underneath the sort are practicing the language activities, which are the same as the ones in the textbook. So I would click on this and then it says type in English translation because that's, the same element to what they're doing in the actual practicing the language activities. And then the Unit 3 dictionary is also wonderful. Obviously, the Unit 3 dictionary has words from Units 1 and 2. It tells you how to use the dictionary, and you really just, you just click anywhere at any time. So if I wanted to look up diende. You know, I find out what it means. I go here and then I just start typing again and I can, you know, figure out something else. Okay, so those are all the student features, but another element to what I want to talk about tonight is what do you do if the students, not all of your students, have this? So think questions. I know I sang their praises so much and some of you might have been like, they look great, but I don't have it for my students. So what can I do? You could always write them up as questions in a Google Doc. I know it seems so simple or straightforward, but you could say, you know, you could write all the questions out. You could project story on the screen for each of the, and, you know, navigate through each of the footnotes, and you could have students make their identifications there. You could have them write down answers as you're projecting the questions. You could also ask them a pair deck, put all those think questions into a pair deck to ask questions about the story. That particular mode of presentation with a pair deck could help you with questions that are like, you know, click the 3 words. Remember we did the 3 words that show where the story takes place. So instead of click the 3 words, you would say, you know, draw a line around the phrase or something like that. And then I already spoke about, you know, projecting that story to the whiteboard and encouraging class participation. When it comes to the grammar and culture sorting activities, or the character one, you could always screenshot those activities and paste the image of that screenshot into a pair deck drawing slide and have the students, you know, draw like lines that sort of connect. So I took that participle sort and I took a quick screenshot of it here. You could put that into a pair deck presentation and have the students just, you know, draw an arrow from, you know, to direct it to each of the columns. Or if they don't want to draw arrows, you could say, you know, circle it in blue if it's a present participle and, you know, purple if it's a perfect active participle, something like that. But you could also create a Google form, and a Google form would have questions that feature, excuse me, row responses. So I have it up here on my screen where it's the same idea of sorting. Admittedly, it's not as much fun as dragging and dropping. I realize that, but you know, in a pinch, this would give you the same element. And I know I only did the 1 question. Remember we said 1 out of 5 questions. I just did the first one just to kind of show you what you would do for each of them, because you can do like rows and a graded row thing for it in Google Forms too. And then another thing that I've started using as well is a manipulative activity through Flippity. So I've linked it here. So if you're on the presentation, you can access this as well. But this is a drag and drop activity. So there we go. We have drag and drop back, right? We can take our participles and we can, you know, make matches of them. We can, so I have the participles in purple and I have translations in green, and then I have headings, so that the students can kind of organize the participles. So you kind of have the same element of drag and drop, but you know, you have something that's kind of color coded. When I do this activity in my class, I have them, you know, do their drag and drop as much as they want, and then I post an answer key. And the answer key is just really, it's just a screenshot of what it looks like when it's done and when all the answers are, you know, loaded into the right place, so they can kind of check their answers. To take it one step further, you could also do something where you give the students this activity, you post the answer key in like a Flipgrid or something like that, and have the students self-assess and say, you know, I was able to figure out all of the present active participles. I really struggled on the perfect active ones. I did most of the perfect passive ones correctly, you know, whatever you want to do to kind of foster that element of reflection as well in your work. And you can do that even if you do have Elevate. All right, what do you do when you can't do the auto-correcting questions from practicing the language? Well, I do want to say at the start, I mean, the sentences that are on Elevate are the same ones that are in the book. So you could do a traditional paper and pencil method. You could project it onto the board. You could still have students write stuff. You could project the actual text onto the board, or, you know, you could have them work together. If you wanted to do something that was tech oriented to, to mimic that practice in the language section, you could do a Google form and have a short answer question that has data validation, which basically means the students have to enter the correct choice in order to move on to the next part of the Google form. I realize that some of the tech suggestions that I'm throwing out here, they might seem casual coming from my mouth. I know that they're not always the easiest processes for everybody to understand. So I apologize if I'm throwing out terms that you might be confused by. But again, I'm happy to revisit these concepts with you at another time and show you what I mean and show you how to make this happen for you in your classroom. All right, what do you do if you can't do that derivative word study that's there? You can use a Quizlet image-based activity. Not many people know about the fact that Quizlet has image options for its vocab lists, but I would recommend that if you really like using the derivative-based activity that's in Elevate, you can accomplish the same type of thing with Quizlet. I'm going to show you what it is in a second. The derivative thing, as you saw, each of these underlined words, when we clicked on it, we saw the derivatives that were in English, French, and Spanish. So I made a Quizlet set. I'm going to show it to you here. And what I did was I put a mark on each of the derivatives. I didn't do the whole thing because I'm really just doing this for the purpose of demonstration today. But for each of these terms, it tells you that what the term is and the definition. The idea of term and definition is a little wonky when you're dealing with derivatives because it's not really a definition, it's really like the source word, but your students will get the idea. And then you are still sourcing it in the story and you're sourcing it in the same way to do that. So two notes about this. So if I'm editing this, I just want to show you in my Quizlet. So I loaded in an image. You have to have saved the image and then you basically upload that image. And then when you are adding points or adding like vocabulary words, you can just kind of copy and paste the information, not paste, it's like more of a mental paste, but the information out of Elevate to put in here. But if I did intront, then I could do, introductory. I don't know if that's what's on the actual Elevate website, but I'm linking it to the term itself. And then I add it. And then it goes on, it becomes part of like a vocab list that I'm making. So it does give that visual association of looking at a story and realizing that there are a lot of Latin or a lot of English words that are sort of preceding or intermingled with your Latin words. But then it also does give that, close association of vocabulary too. You can use these visual things too in Quizlet Live. I know Quizlet Live was like the very first online vocab game that we all played way back in the day when that was the only game in town. I think it still has a lot of value, this Quizlet Live game. And I think with an image too, it really helps the students to sort of place each of the derivatives that are sourced from the Latin vocabulary. One final note, if you are going to be using something like this for a Quizlet activity, I would encourage you to maintain copyright as best you can by keeping this set private to your account rather than making it a publicly available set so that the stories themselves are not floating in the ether of the internet and they're in a more controlled environment. So, it's one of those things, it's fine to use it in your classroom because you yourself, you have paid for the access to the stories, but because the internet at large has not paid for access to the stories, we should make sure that we, maintain copyright as best as we possibly can. If you can't do Vocab Tester with your students, if you can't make it an assignment for them, you could really easily make it an in-class, like a relay game activity, right? Where you have 100 words and, you have the kids do it in a relay fashion where they have to define the word and they go to the back of the line. The next kid goes up, they have to define the next word, they go to the back of the line and, so on and so forth. Give each team a 100-word challenge to see how quickly they can do 100 words or, how quickly and with what score they can do 100 words, just make it a fun game that you could do with them in class, just utilizing the projector. Additionally, you could use your Elevate access, so your computer, as a station activity. If you've done stations in your class, the vocab station could be everybody gathers around Magistra's computer and we all as a team work on that vocabulary tester. You know, maybe that particular station is define 200 words together because, you know, maybe 10-minute stations, something like that. And then finally, the listening to the story, you can pretty easily replicate that listening experience by recording a screencast of yourself reading that story aloud to your students. You can utilize any number of vocal recording software sites to your advantage for that. Flipgrid would be great for that. Voice memos, even just on your phone, you can record yourself speaking it as an MP4 and load it to Classroom, and then, you know, students can listen to you reading it there. And then finally, the CSCP culture background links. As you saw, I mean, the links are so plentiful for each of the stages. You could create your own list of the websites. You can just access each of them and curate them into your own list for your students. You could create that as a topic in Google Classroom. You could do it as a topic or a unit of study in Moodle or whatever your LMS might be. So that you could just say, you know, stage 22 culture links, and then just put them all there and, you know, house them in one place. If you want to get even fancier, you could do something like Linktree software. Linktree is really a way to organize a bunch of links in one singularly accessible location for your students. So that's it for now, because it is 8 o'clock and I've talked your ears to death about Elevate. But as I said earlier, please feel free to drop a line with any questions. If you didn't get the tiny URL from the first slide, it's here now. And of course, if you have access to the slide, this will also give you access to the CLC training page so that you can access recordings of this webinar and others and find out about upcoming things like TLC for CLC, which is coming up on the 25th.